If you like Psych with Mike, here's a couple of ways that you could really help us out. You could subscribe to the show on Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok at Psych with Mike. But the two things that would really, really help us out is subscribing to us on YouTube, search Psych with Mike, but also going to Apple Podcasts and leaving us a review and a comment. And as always, if it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike. Welcome to the Psych with Mike Library. This is Dr. Michael Mahan. I'm here, as always, with my good friend and colleague, Mr. Brett Newcomb.
How are you today?
I'm doing well. I am very aware that in the not too distant future, you're going to be traveling again because you're a traveling man.
Yeah, but I'm traveling differently than I've traveled in quite some time. I mean, it's almost going to be like being at home. We're going to take food to eat on the road, and we're going to drive the car, and we're going to go to a condo that is nobody there but us. Mm-hmm. And it's been cleaned properly.
Yeah.
And we're going to stay there, but we're going somewhere where it's warm.
You're doing a What About Bob?
No, I'm doing a lifelong fantasy. I have lived in the Midwest my whole life, mm-hmm. and I've always dreamt that once I retired, I would go away for the winter. Mm-hmm. And so my wife and I are going to South Texas for January and February.
But you're going for a month.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, in What About Bob? Remember Richard Dreyfuss' character?
Yes,
yeah,
I know the movie well.
And I always thought, how can somebody be so well off that they could go away for a month or more? Now, he was going to write a book, so I mean, he had a mission,
work related,
but
tax breaks.
Yeah, but how do you just go somewhere and move into a place and live there for 6 weeks?
Well, you have to be very frugal, and you have to have no friends.
Yeah. Well, apparently his friends followed him. So
Bob did certainly.
He had friends, but maybe not the friends that he wanted.
Well, that's a question we all ask, isn't it?
Although by the end of the movie, him and Bob were good friends. They were very tight.
Don't remember that clearly.
I don't remember either.
I don't think they were.
I don't. I just remember that Bob followed him, Bill Murray followed him, and they had hilarious hijinks.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, are you looking forward to this?
I very much am looking forward to it.
And you've not ever done this before, right?
No,
where you've just gone somewhere and been for a month?
No, never.
So do you think that is, do you think you'll get used to being there and feel like that is, whether it's home or not, but that is where you belong? Or do you think that after 3 days you'll be like, oh, I want to go to my house? And
So we've never talked about this, but I do not get emotionally invested in things mm-hmm. Or places, mm-hmm. and so that never occurs to me to be sad because I'm not home around my things, you mm-hmm. know, that I can touch and have memories with. I get invested in people, and I miss the people that mm-hmm. I regularly see, but I'm also pretty good about meeting new people and talking to people, except this year I don't expect that we'll be doing much of that because of the pandemic.
Right.
So it'll be a different set of circumstances. But my wife and I have talked about it. We really think we'll do the same thing that we do at home. We'll mm-hmm. read books. We'll go for walks. We'll fix mm-hmm. meals. We'll live as a couple in a bubble. Mm-hmm.
I just remember,
except it'll be a warm bubble.
I remember the first year that I went skiing with you guys.
Yeah. Which
is like 20 years ago now.
Yeah, you were a puppy then.
I was, and that year, I don't know if you remember that we had a caravan. We had a caravan going to Colorado. We rented this big, well, I didn't, but somebody rented this big house.
Yeah.
And we were all staying there. And I literally the only person, and there were 20 people like in this house.
Yeah.
And the only person that I knew there was you.
Right.
And I eventually got to know Paul, who is your very good friend. But, you know, those are the only two that I have stayed in contact with out of that whole group. But I remember that first year, I was just so homesick and so lost after the first day. We slept in this bunk room. It was like literally a bunk room with these bunk beds, and a bunch of us just slept in there because we really didn't need any kind of luxuries or anything, and I would just cry on my bunk and call my wife and say, I want to come home. And there was actually, I don't know if you ever knew this, there was actually a point at which I had asked someone to take me back to Denver to so I could get on an airplane and go home.
I did not know that.
Yeah, yeah, and I ended up not doing that, which I'm very thankful for now. But yeah, I just, I had a hard time. And now, we go skiing, and, I call my wife a couple of times a day, and it doesn't bother me at all. But initially, it was really hard. And I don't know if, I think that when you, if you are a person that enjoys traveling.
So is that a statement about personal security, or is that a statement about love?
Well, I think it's a statement about personal security. I mean, I don't think that it was that it was my deep abiding love of my wife that was driving me to feel that way. I think it was insecurity.
I remember we drove to Denver, and you would call her like every hour and a half.
Yeah.
Hi, what's going on?
Yeah.
Oh, we just saw a deer. Hi, what's going on? Oh, we just saw a tree. Hey. Anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and because I think that it was hard for me to
have mature adult conversation with two men,
or feel comfortable enough in my own skin to be in that situation and
be
not
one of the
feel
guys.
threatened. Yeah. And now I don't have that. I mean, I enjoy. See, but I'm different than you. I enjoy my stuff. And so when I go away, even if it's on vacation, after a couple of days, I'm like, oh, if I was at my house, I could do this.
Yeah.
And so I
don't have that issue.
You're not that.
At all.
You don't have that kind of connection.
No, stuff is stuff.
Yeah. So you and I are talking today in the context of having a conversation about our concern that there is this division that we see in society over the president's non-acceptance of the results of the election, what that means, because his message is causing a lot of other people to parrot that idea back, whether they themselves believe it or not. There's a large contingent in our country that's saying that this election was not valid, which we think is scary. We've been talking about what we can do to try and deal with that. I propose to you my philosophy that I believe we're all in this existential crisis, which is the pandemic, and that it is having a real influence on the way that we're processing information, whether we're consciously aware of it or not, and that when the pandemic's over, I think that people are going to wake up as if from a dream and say, oh, wow, it's a new day, and maybe I'm not as cynical as I thought I was. But I don't know that.
You're going to say things like, who was that masked man?
Yeah. And so we were talking about that. But what I think gets lost in that is what the impact of all of this might be having on our children.
Well, not just our children, Michael. Our culture. Things are changing in ways they've never needed to change before, even though we've had other crisis points before, and in significant numbers. So what's the impact on the divorce rate when it becomes free to range and roam? What's the impact on child abuse? What's the impact on marital spousal abuse? What's the impact on the economy, on education? What's going to happen to these kids who've lost a year of their traditional educational path, wherever they are on the curve? I heard a discussion this morning that said that the studies are beginning to show pretty conclusively that young children really do not do much in the way of spreading the virus, and there's really not much reason scientifically to keep them out of school. Initially, we were concerned that we had to protect their grandparents, and that even a little kid could bring it home and grandma could die, and so now they're saying that it doesn't seem to be happening that way. We have enough numbers on the board that we can see patterns that we couldn't see before. And so now certainly younger kids ought to go back to school. So that's an interesting discussion, because the other stuff that I've been reading says younger kids are the ones that are most educationally damaged, not just because of classroom time, but socialization time, spending time around others, having a secondary frame of reference. We used to talk about the fact that children don't develop a comparative parental analysis until they start going to school.
Right.
Whatever happens in their house is what happens in their house.
You just accept it as.
Then you go to school and you find out somebody else gets to go to France for winter vacation. You're like, well, where's
Humble
France?
Humble brag.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Because you've been to France many times.
Nevertheless, kids start to say, Johnny gets to stay up late and watch something on TV. I have to go to bed at a certain time. Johnny gets to have a Game Boy. I don't get to have one. Stuff like that. And they start to compare. And they start to make their own little personal list. When I have children, I will. Or when I have children, I won't. That's based on what their comparative parental analysis is. These kids are all disrupted. And friends and I were talking the other day. What if you lived in a big city, in a tall apartment building, in a tiny little apartment with one or two kids that you had to take care of and entertain and occupy and keep healthy and alive and invigorated in this small, tiny little space?
Right.
You can't.
The seventh or eighth floor of an apartment building in New York, and you can't go outside.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, man. I mean, it would be literally torture.
So I tend to think of that in terms of, okay, as a parent, projecting myself into this situation, I think about what would the impact of that be on me? What would the responsibilities be? What would my worries be? How would I make sure there was enough food and what have you? But what you wanted to talk to me today about is what do I think is going on with the kids? How are they responding? What's the cost-benefit ratio to them?
And the thing that really brought this to my mind was I remember after 9/11, and I could tell the whole story about I remember exactly where I was. I mean, that's the one thing that I know I will never forget. I can remember exactly where I was, what I was doing, how I felt.
I was teaching an 8 o'clock psychology class at Missouri Baptist University, an undergraduate class, and we rolled a television set in and watched the buildings come down.
Yeah.
And the class was stunned and numbed.
But they did that in elementary schools.
Yeah, that's what we wanted to talk about, because my wife was an elementary teacher at
Yeah.
the time, and some of her cohorts did exactly that.
Right.
Without thinking, what's this going to do to the psyche of the kids?
Exactly.
Are they going to get scared? Are they going to get terrified? Are they going to worry about their parents or their own safety?
When I started doing, and I don't even remember how I got into this, I think I was asked to do some presentations then on this subsequently. And so I did a bunch of research, and what I found out was something that was really startling to me, and that was that the children, they're below the age of like 8, didn't have the intellectual capacity to understand that every time that a plane flew into a building that it was on a loop. And so for a lot of those kids, their experience was
buildings everywhere.
That 100 planes flew into 100 buildings that day. And, if they went home and their parents were shut down and not attentive because they were trying to soothe themselves, that there were a lot of kids that were horribly, horribly traumatized.
Yeah.
And that was one day in the life of a child back in 2001. What's happening? It was 2001, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And so what's happening today when we've had a year of this happening to a child who may not be able to fully comprehend?
Well, but I think the same discussion can be had about exposing children to violence on television, period, before the age of 8. If they're watching movies where people are getting killed and beaten up and shot and dismembered and eviscerated, what does that do to them? They don't have any basis of understanding or comparison. They don't understand it's fiction. It's a movie.
Right.
They don't know what that means. So where do they put that?
Well,
And especially if they see, daddy slap mom around every once in a while, or slap them around every once in a while. It's
Right.
like, okay, that's what people do.
That's what people do, right?
Yeah.
And so, obviously, the first line of defense in any of this is the parent. So the parents have to be able to help the children process this, but that means that the parent has to be able to effectively process it and then be able to relate a message to the child that the child can understand.
So I spent 7 years as a member of the State Child Abuse and Neglect Review Board, where state workers get complaints of child abuse from teachers and preachers and doctors and neighbors and whomever, and they go out and investigate, and they write up a report. And if they think the parents were abusive, that whatever this action was abusive, then they suggest that they be put on the child abuse list. And if you're on the child abuse list, you can't get a job as a nurse or a nurse's aide or a teacher or a lot of other jobs. So parents get distraught, like, well, you're ruining my ability to support my family. You can't do this. And the state says, yeah, but you did really bad things, and you can't treat your children that way. And, So then they said, well, you don't know what you're doing. So they could appeal it to the board that I was on. We would hear the appeals. We'd read all the paperwork and the reports of the state and whatever paperwork the parents would bring in, and we'd have a discussion with the parents and then among ourselves, and we'd make a decision. And we would either agree with the parents, and this is not, it doesn't trip the line, so you're good to go, and you won't be on the list, the registry. Or we would say, I think they made a good decision here. In which case, then the parents still had the right, if they chose to do so, to take it to court and have a judge and jury decide whether or not they were abusive parents. So there were layers of protection for the parents, but the goal behind it all was to find a way to protect the children. There are children in our culture who are harmed by their family environments and their life circumstances pretty egregiously a lot of the time. And the question today is that exacerbated, and how aggressively is it exacerbated by the pandemic and our response to the pandemic? People are laid off, people are unemployed, people can't get groceries, there's not enough money for food in the house, and the kids hear the echoes of that. Mom, I'm hungry. Son, we don't have anything to eat. Mom, it's Christmas. What am I going to have for Christmas? Son, we're not going to have anything. We're probably going to get moved out on the street because we have no place to go unless we can move in with your uncle or your grandmother because we can't pay the rent and we lost our job. I mean, that's a heavy burden to share with a child. I mean, it's a heavy burden on an adult, on the parent who's looking in the mirror saying, what do I do?
Well, and especially a child who may not be able to understand the complexity of what the parent is actually conveying to them.
Yeah.
Okay, let's take a break, and we'll pick this up on the other side. Be right back. Hey, Brett, if you were going to tell somebody to check out something on the internet to help them with their mental health, what would you tell them?
I'd tell them, listen to Psych with Mike.
Why would you tell them that?
Because it's probably one of the most easily listenable experiences you can have that will give you information that's useful for a whole spectrum of concerns that people have.
I agree, and I have actually been told that by at least a dozen people, several of whom were not married to me, and some of them didn't even know me.
That's amazing.
That is amazing. It's when we get that kind of feedback from people, it is so incredibly humbling and overwhelming for me.
It is for both of us.
Yeah. So we really appreciate it, and as always, if it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike. Okay, we're back, and so what advice would you give to a parent who might be thinking about, I want to have this conversation with my child, but I don't know how, and I don't know what they understand? Because a lot of times, when I teach developmental psychology and am trying to convey to my students that kids don't think the same way that we do. And we don't understand, so the process by which your cognitive structures change, according to Piaget, is called equilibration. So once you get past a part of developmental period, you don't remember what it was like to think before that. So the best example is when you're born, you don't know how to speak. So you learn through what's called sensory motor input. And that's the same way you learn how to swing a golf club or a baseball bat or ride a bike. So you can still learn that way after you learn language. But once you learn language, you can't remember what it was like to only learn that way, right?
Right.
And so kids think differently than adults do, and adults can't approach the child the same way that they would approach another adult. So what would you say to a parent who wants to have that conversation with their child, but they want to have it in a way that the child can understand?
Well, I would say to the parent, what's your goal? What's your agenda? What's your plan? What are you trying to accomplish? If you have a conversation with your child and you think it's important for their development or their sense of security or their sense of happiness or whatever it might be, then we want to tailor the message to the goal. So if you want to say, I lost my job, but we have extended family. That most of them still have jobs, and they'll take care of us because people will always take care of us in families because we're family. So we may have to move in with grandma, but it'll be for a while, and then we'll get our own place again. But everything's going to be all right. You don't need to be afraid. If that's the goal of the conversation, if you want to say to them, life is random and you're screwed, then what's okay.
Well, but now that you're saying that, I'm thinking about that, and I'm thinking, wow, what a great opportunity that would be to sit down with the child and say, hey, we're going to move in with grandma. It's not going to be forever. It's just going to be for a while. I wonder how many parents actually have that.
Well, they don't.
Seen that.
I mean,
no, they don't.
As a psychologist,
they just move in.
You've had conversations with parents about life changes. Mom and dad are getting divorced. Dad lost his job. My grandpa had a heart attack. They don't talk to the kids about anything. We don't have money. We're worried about Christmas. How are we going to pay our bills? They don't. They, being the parents, the adults, do not have conversations with the children to put words to the reality that the children live. And without the words, the children just get the emotional waves, the anger, the distance, the coldness, the distress, the sadness, and they don't know where to put it because parents don't talk to their kids. And we have suggested families, there are ways to do this, that even like a divorce. There are ways to talk about the fact that you're going to get a divorce that don't aggressively damage the children more in service of one partner or the other's agenda. If my agenda now is to say, you son of a gun, I'm going to make these kids hate you because you're a bad person. So I'm going to go home and complain about you, and I'm going to say you were out screwing around, and you did this, and you did that. And so, and I'm going to interfere with your ability to be with them. I don't want you to take them for the weekends. I don't want you to take them for vacation because I'm not able to take them for vacation. Why should you be able, all that garbage that goes on, the visceral hatred that comes out and gets dumped in the lap of a 7-year-old that just wants to love her daddy or mom and be with them. So the biggest problem as a counselor that I see there is can we get the two adults to agree to still be adults and be co-parents and parent in the best interest of their children, even when their own personal agendas are in dire straits and significant distress. Because I think that would be the goal to me.
And so the goal is the first thing. What is your goal? What do you want to convey to the child? And then the second thing is to understand that children below the age of like 11...
They process differently.
They have no ability to think critically. They don't have abstract thought. They're not doing algebra equations. Right. I mean, they may be doing algebra, but they're not.
They may just be starting around 11. Yeah. But, developmentally before that,
exactly. No. And so they're very black and white, and you have to think about that.
Is daddy bad? Yeah,
right,
daddy's bad.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. If you say, if they say, are you saying daddy's bad? Yes, daddy's bad.
Yeah.
Well, then that's the message that they're walking away with. Yeah. And later on, you may think, I didn't give them that message. Where are they getting that from? Well, you did give them that message. Right. So you have to be very, very understanding about how you're going to present that
But as
message.
A counselor, it's hard to get that message across to the adults because the adults are in such pain and or anger
that's a good point.
That they're having trouble being rational.
Yeah.
And you keep having to ask them, what are we working on here? Are we working on putting you back together? Are we working on making you stronger and healthier? Are we working on making you a better parent for your children? What do your children need from you? I remember any number of conversations that I had with mothers who were living in untenable circumstances with a father, and the conversation would be, you have children here, and you're raising them in this environment that's brutal and dangerous. As a parent, is that a responsible thing to do? Do you need to make a decision here that's in the best interest of your children, or are you still just trying to take care of yourself and whatever your shoulds are? Those are hard conversations to have. They're very painful realities to look at.
Well, if somebody is going to therapy to try and process this, that's a great thing because you can then actually do some role playing and you can actually, as a therapist, you can actually help them to craft a message that would be hearable by the child, understandable by the child, but also convey what the parent's intent was. But I don't think that a lot of people go to therapy to figure out how to have that conversation. So people are doing it on the fly. So, I think that we are trying to suggest to people that you have a plan, right? And as a parent, if I were going to have this conversation about the pandemic with my child, I would want to think about that in advance You can even write down some notes for yourself so that you stay on task, because just as you say, you may lose your focus because you may get emotionally invested in the message, and then you may go off on a tangent that isn't beneficial to the child, but is you processing your own existential anxiety. And so try and have some kind of a roadmap for how you're going to be able to stay on task.
I am very capable of going off on a tangent and losing the roadmap.
Of course.
Especially when I'm distressed and upset. And that, we're all human beings. Mm-hmm. These are common human traits. The challenge then is to say, how can I be a better human being? What is it that makes me a better human being? Is it my ability to listen? Mm-hmm. Is it my ability to self-soothe? Is it my commitment to values and goals? I mean, where does this go for me so that I can be the best me I can be, and thereby provide the best quality of life for my child or children?
The idea of writing down kind of the
Stay
skeleton
focused.
of a script is something that I talk about with clients a lot, and rarely do people actually do it. Yeah. But in the cases where people have done it, I've never had somebody come back and say, "Oh, I did that and it was horrible." People always say, "Oh, I wrote that down and it really helped a lot."
Yeah.
Nobody ever says that wasn't good. Now, people
part of that,
talk about doing it and then they don't do it.
Educationally, as a teacher, that writing things down helps us remember them. It helps us clarify our thinking and remember our data points. And if you got the notes in front of you and you remember to look at them, they will help you stay focused to make the points you want to make. One of the biggest frustrations that I have as a presenter, speaker, teacher, is when I watch others in those positions who can't do a good job of delivery. Mm-hmm. And they have not gone through the steps to organize their thoughts in a train of points that reach a conclusion that they want to get the audience to. Mm-hmm. And I think it's the same thing we're talking about. You just said, expand, the depth or breadth of your focus. Mm-hmm.
And I don't think you have to be a good public presenter to be able to have the conversation with your children.
One hopes.
Right. But I do think that, having a goal, thinking about it in advance, thinking about what your children can understand, and possibly writing down the bare bones skeleton of a roadmap.
Well, you keep asking yourself, what do they really need? Mm-hmm. What do they need? They need, especially the younger the child, they need a sense of security and safety.
Exactly.
Can I give them that? They need to know that they are loved and will be loved.
That's right.
Can I make them hear
no matter
that,
what happens,
even if we're hungry? So rather than giving too much information, it's like the old joke about the kid that comes in and says, "Mom, where did I come from?" And she unloads the whole birds and bees argument, and then he says, "Yeah, but Joey comes from Cincinnati." You need to, and that's one of the things I used to tell parents all the time, ask your child for clarification. Yeah. What do they want to know? Which piece of this are they curious about? Don't give them the whole prepackaged thing that you thought ahead of time that you would say when the right opportunity came. This may not be that opportunity.
Right.
Ask them what they want to know, and then tell them what they need to know in a way that makes them feel safe.
That's really good. All right. Hopefully that was helpful for people. As always, the music that appears in Psych with Mike is written and performed by Mr. Benjamin DeClue. If you would like, we would love it if you would go to the Apple Podcasts and leave us a comment and rate us. That's always very helpful for the show. And as always, if it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike.